Hello and welcome to the India Debate, where each week we discuss the issues that matter with the people who count. In the last few weeks there have been a series of scandals that have affected the image of the Indian judiciary. The Indian government has proposed reforms to tackle the matter, but will they work? With me to answer that question is Senior Supreme Court Advocate Abhishek Singhvi and the Senior Editor of the Indian Express, Manoj Mittal. Welcome to the program, gentlemen. In recent months, Mr. Singhvi, we've had a series of scandals, sex scandals. We've seen judges being arrested in public. We've even seen one incarcerated in jail. How much has the image of the judiciary suffered?
It's probably been the worst concentrated phase of image suffering and judiciary bashing. And I as a member of that system, I feel deeply pained and sorry about it. I don't think in the recent or the long past there has ever been a period like this, and I think it's much more than a wake-up call. It's an electric shock, it's a jolt, and it's a jolt which, if properly used in a balanced way, should lead to fundamental reforms of the system, not salacious, scandalous gossip, but solid reform.
Given that many people in India look upon the judiciary as perhaps the only properly functioning institution the country has, all others seem to have fallen by the wayside, is this therefore also going to affect the morale of the nation?
Oh yes, I think in this country in particular, more than any other place, we have one of the most advanced legal judicial minds in the world. We have the most advanced judicial doctrines. This country has given to the world things like basic structure and other doctrines. On the other hand, we have this great faith in the system which held us in good stead when others can.
Cancer in the judiciary
there is a greater effect. It affects the faith much more so, because there is not the same degree of cynicism and causticity which you have towards the bureaucracy, the political establishment, the legislature or the executive.
Many people say that the manner in which the judiciary is handled, whether it's the Mysore sex scandal or the Rajasthan sex scandal or the Punjab scandal, has been less than satisfactory. The process hasn't been transparent. In fact, no action has been taken. Do you share that criticism of the way the judiciary has handled its own problems?
I fully agree with you. The principle involved in it is, the higher the authority, the higher your image as conscience keeper of the nation, the higher should be the level of accountability. Somewhere along the line, that fact has been overlooked, and judiciary has tended to behave with impunity, and this concentrated phase of scandals, as Abhishek put it, is going to be an opportunity for us to bring about much needed reforms, and it's just as well that the government reacted to it with alacrity and came up with this bill.
Okay, before we talk about the reforms the government has come up, as he says, almost with alacrity, the only mechanism that existed up to now to discipline judges was the mechanism of impeachment. It was tried in 1993 in the case of Justice Ramaswamy, and it failed. Are you of the view that impeachment is too cumbersome and too difficult a process for this?
Well, 2 points. Firstly, of course, yes, the answer is yes. But secondly, I think we must remember always and hearken back to the fact that it is not by inadvertence or by accident that it is too cumbersome. Do not forget the original intent of the framers. There is a deliberate intent to make it more cumbersome, to uphold the other value, namely the value of insulating the independence of the judiciary from pot shots and casual attacks.
So then would you also go one step further and say that impeachment is really the final action? We need some measure of disciplining before impeachment.
Justice Krishna Iyer put it very aptly. He said, in this statute we have only one penalty, the death penalty, that is impeachment, the Brahmastra of punishment. The problem is that we need a graded hierarchy or at least some lesser punishments. The fact of balance is important. You have to remember that impeachment was made more cumbersome to protect independence, but you must have lesser penalties also.
One of the last Chief Justices, Chief Justice Patnaik, on record, and in fact I believe it was to your newspaper, it may even have been to you, said that we need more powers given to justices themselves, particularly to the Chief Justice, for instance, powers such as stopping a judge's pay or withdrawing work as disciplinary powers. Do you accept that, and is that part of the background of the government's thinking?
I think what Justice Patnaik said was more by way of an excuse for inaction. I recall there was an instance, the Rajasthan sex scandal for instance. The committee appointed by him came out with a very damaging finding that the allegation of his having, the judge concerned, having prepositioned a female doctor in exchange for a judicial order, a judicial favor, was established. And yet he said that his hands are tied. There's also a suggestion that this judge was involved in some corruption.
So what you are saying is that when Chief Justice Patnaik called for greater but lesser powers to help judges enforce discipline, he didn't mean it. He was simply using it as an excuse for failing to do his job.
Yeah, he was just making excuses.
The government, of course, has now proposed a National Judicial Commission. It will comprise 3 judges, including the Chief Justice. It will also comprise 2 government appointees, including the Law Minister. Is this commission a good way of imposing discipline for lesser infractions which don't deserve what you called the death penalty of impeachment?
Well, one must have a body of some kind to do that. To that extent I agree. But whether this formulation, this structure is the right one, I have my grave doubts.
What are your concerns?
My concerns are that merely by adding a executive functionary like the Law Minister, merely by adding a nominee of the President or the Prime Minister, you're not going to solve the problem.
What do you need
First
then?
issue is that should you at all have people outside the peer group to discipline?
Let's
That's a
quickly
major
bring
issue.
Manoj in on that. Should you have people outside the judicial profession involved in disciplining judges as the proposed National Judicial Commission intends?
Well, the best argument in favor of that proposal is the fact that the judiciary has failed to act whenever the occasion demanded.
But do
So
you
they
have to go
proved,
all that
incapable
extra step to bring politicians into the process?
Well, there is nothing totally new about that. When we talk about appointments, for instance, politicians were involved in it in the first instance. It was the judiciary which...
But we're talking now about disciplining rather than appointments. Do you think that politicians should be involved in disciplining?
Even when it comes to impeachment, ultimately it is with the politicians who vote.
The
Right?
point
So
is not the point is not that you should not have merely an outside element. The point is that for disciplining, for imposing a punishment, today the judges cannot do anything because there is no power. You need an extra power. Suppose, for example, the existing judicial collegium or a new body comprising judges is given full powers to discipline by a statute or by a constitutional amendment, saying you may suspend, you may not give work, you may dismiss, you may remove. Then they'd have the power. Today, a judicial collegium does not have the power. That is why it has failed. What Manoj is saying is...
Are you therefore saying
Yes.
that it's not a question of creating a body for disciplining,
Exactly.
it's a question of giving adequate powers to whatever the body is?
No, 2 things. Firstly, it is not merely a question of creating a body, you have to give powers. Secondly, one must always counterbalance these things. These are not matters of just reacting to an individual episode. It is not this judge or that judge. Over the next 50 years, we have to protect that very precious commodity, which is even more important,
Manoj,
judicial independence. If you have politicians as judges, what happens?
Manoj, you're more in agreement with what the government proposes than Mr. Singhvi is. Do you think that this body, if given adequate powers as well, would serve the purpose it's meant for?
So the reason I welcome this proposal of the government is because it promises to bring about greater transparency in this very critical aspect. We've had a situation of the judiciary creating what they call in-house procedure of inquiry, and they launched that sometime in 1999 with this promise of bringing about greater accountability, but there's very little evidence of it whenever the occasion arose, as I
So
said.
this body, if it's transparent and if it investigates thoroughly, will actually be effective in disciplining errant members of the judiciary.
Yeah, and it will also hopefully have a deterrent effect on judges from indulging in this kind of corruption.
What about a view that is, we need something, why not try this and evolve it as it goes along?
We need something, but since we are creating something new, let us not jump into it, let us discuss it and decide something which will stay for some time.
So the measure requires greater debate and discussion.
And nobody is asking for an in-house inquiry, as it's saying. It's simple to create a commission manned by judges with full investigative power, just like a hearing, with disclosure, with transparency, but you can still insulate it from politicians, from bureaucrats.
You're
Just-
very concerned about this involvement of politicians.
In fact, I believe that
But
if you
briefly.
increase the involvement of politicians, you might be violating the basic principle of the Indian Constitution, the basic structure.
Okay, well,
which says judicial independence is fundamental.
Let's
Can't be
not
touched.
go into that debate, because clearly Manoj doesn't share your concerns. Manoj argued that even at the level of impeachment, it is politicians who take the decision. Let's take a break there, because clearly this is an issue that needs debate, it needs discussion, it can't be imposed, and come back and look at how are judges appointed, because if there is rot in the judiciary, clearly that's where it begins. We'll be back in a moment in part 2 to talk about what do we do about the appointment process. See you in a moment. Welcome back to the Indian debate. We're talking about the Indian judiciary. Manoj, let's come to the question of how judges are appointed. At the moment, a collegium of judges chooses their own successors. Why is that system not working?
It's a system that was not envisaged by the founding fathers. It's a system that the judiciary created on its own in 93, and Indian judiciary has this dubious distinction of being about the only judiciary in the world, at least among civilized countries, where the judiciary is self-perpetuating, where the judiciary decides who the judges should be. So obviously that led to some kind of an oligarchy, that led to a system where judges of the higher judiciary, especially the Supreme Court, become the new focal point for all sorts of lobbying that goes on. So it's had overall a very negative effect. It has not improved the quality of appointments. It has led to delays in appointments.
Mr. Singhvi, the government has proposed a National Judicial Commission to now look after appointments hereafter. Is that the right solution?
Well, I think for that you have to first see the existing system. Why does it not work? We can keep changing institutions, but
briefly,
according to me,
why does it not work?
it does not work because the following process happens. And this will happen whether you have a
What is
judicial
the process?
commission
Because
or
we're
the
running out of
executive.
time. What is the
The
process?
process is that we know from any high court the 5 or the 7 best appointees which should be appointed to the bench. We know them, we can easily find them. Any blind man can find them. Having found them, we then play favorites, we play politics, we play caste politics.
Quite right. That
and we
is
don't select
inherent,
them.
but that is inherent in the character of members of the judiciary. So to get away from individuals playing politics or favorites, the government's proposed a judicial commission. What's wrong with
Well,
that?
there is a commission even today. Please don't forget, the collegium today is a commission. The only difference from what the government is proposing is there will be 2 more members in it. Today, Judge 1, Judge 2 and Judge 3 select. That's a collegium, that's like a commission. At that time again there will be 3 plus 2. How do you assume that by the addition of a law minister, an eminent person, by a magical wand you will change the whole
So
thing?
you're saying that the new system
You
of
have
a
to go into
commission
the-
is no better than the old one?
It's just changing the form. That's the point I'm making. You have to go to the root of the cause. Why does it not work? What is bad with the today's system will remain bad with the new system if we just go around changing institutions.
He's suggesting that the reason why the old system doesn't work is because people play favorites. The new system could still allow them to do the same thing.
Yes, sir.
Therefore, the problem will continue. How do you answer that?
Let's take this the specific example of Justice Shamit Mukherjee, who a few weeks ago suffered the ignominy of being arrested on a charge of corruption. Now this man was appointed not very long back under the system that is controlled entirely by the judiciary. So in that sense it is the judiciary which has to take the entire discredit for appointing a bad apple like this.
But can you guarantee that under the government's proposed judicial commission, someone like Mukherjee won't be appointed again?
No, there are no foolproof arrangements anybody can make. The virtue with this system is that the consultation will be more broad-based and accountability also will be greater in this system, because the government cannot wash its hands off.
Let me put
problem.
to you what Rajiv Dhawan, a fellow Supreme Court lawyer like yourself, has written in one of the newspapers. He says that in fact you need an even bigger commission than what the government has proposed, where you have 3 judges, 3 politicians, including the leader of the opposition, and then 3 members of the lay public who are informed, who are appointed by the president. And this 9-member commission would be a better appointing body. Would that take care of your concern?
I would substantially agree with that, provided, as I think Dhawan also suggests, provided you separate the disciplinary function from the appointment function. Because in such a broad-based commission, you are doing the right thing, you are getting a larger broad-based consultative process, greater participation, greater transparency, but for appointment. I am not in favor of having such a broad entity controlling or disciplining judges. That's a different matter. That should be more in-house.
So what
But
you're
certainly
saying is
for
that
appointment, yes.
you need a broad entity
Absolutely.
to appoint,
Yes.
and the more you involve informed members of the public, the better.
Well, within reason, you have to have public, you have to have eminent people, you have to have legislators, you have to have judges. You have to mix of all of them.
Would you accept that principle? The broader the entity and the more wide-ranging the selection of people in it, the better the body would be for appointing purposes.
Yeah, he is saying that only to emphasize the point that the same does not apply to the aspect of
Well, he
disciplinary
wants
aspect.
disciplining to stay strictly in the hands
No,
of
also
the
for
judges
getting better
themselves. He
materials
thinks
for
politicians
appointment.
shouldn't
That's
be
right.
involved.
That's right.
But let's leave disciplining aside, because we came to an agreement at the end of part one that more debate and discussion is needed on the disciplining aspect. Now let's stick to the appointing. If a broader body along the lines he proposes is created, would you be satisfied?
Yeah, that augurs well for the system. It hopefully obviates.
But will the
casteism
government
and-
accept this amendment, because their proposed body doesn't include the leader of the opposition and it doesn't include eminent members of the public?
Well, the government's bill is broadly based on the recommendation made by the Constitution Review Commission, and the principle involved in that recommendation is let's have people outside the judiciary involved in this process.
Yes, but the government
so if
has
you are going to extend it to leader of opposition, there is no conflict with that principle. Yes, if there is consensus on such a change being brought about, so be it.
Except, is there consensus involving the leader of the opposition? That's the nub.
Yeah, I mean, the argument in favor of that is leader of the opposition apparently is involved in appointing some other high authorities like.
So don't confuse the roles. Yeah. Okay, again, this is a subject on which the government and the opposition are going to have to sit down and knock their heads together, but you feel a broad body would be a good idea.
Yeah.
Let's take a break, gentlemen, and come back and look at what for many lay people is the real problem. Denial of justice, because cases and backlogs have built up into something that's horrifying. That's the subject in the last part. See you in a moment. Welcome back to the India debate. We're talking about problems afflicting the Indian judiciary. Gentlemen, let's come to a problem that for most lay people is the biggest concern, the backlog of cases and therefore the denial of justice. There are apparently 21 million cases waiting to be heard, and some of them go back decades. How serious a problem is this?
I'm embarrassed to say that you are giving a figure on the lower side.
It's
higher
even
than
higher.
that, yes. There is something like between 25 to 30 million all told.
Although the
Bottom,
official figure given by the Law Ministry is the one I've quoted.
well, I mean, the figures I have, not this year but till last year, about 25 million. But that doesn't really matter. 21 million is very bad
But
anyway.
how serious is this, therefore?
It's extremely serious. This is the, as I said, in a very advanced system, this is the only problem we have. And the causes are many. The solutions have to be multi-pronged and holistic, not one, 4, 5 together.
Before we get to the solutions, let me put to you something that the government has attempted. The present Law Minister 2 years ago proposed fast-track courts. He said he would set up 1,734 in 5 years. He's now set up 980, and his ministry claims that 42% of the cases given to them they've already cleared. Now, does all of that add up to a significant start, or is that just meaningless figures?
One must bear in mind that these so-called fast-track courts are not going to be a replacement of the existing system. They are just add-ons. They are going to be dealing with particularly sticky ones, and right now their focus is on criminal
So you're saying they
cases.
don't make a big dent in the backlog?
Yeah, not very much, but I mean, there's always a need for an effort to clear up whatever they can, and so
If fast-track courts aren't going to sort out the problem as he suggests, will the problem be sorted out by plugging vacancies, particularly in the lower judiciary?
One very important reason, not only lower judiciary, high judiciary as well. That's one important reason. Again, I said, no one single thing is going to help.
But
You have
explain to me, why are there vacancies of the order of 2,000 in the lower judiciary and as many as 130 in high courts and supreme courts? Why do they exist?
Well, sheer political negligence, playing favorites, delaying things. A
But
judge's
surely
date
when
of
you play
retirement,
favorites, you actually appoint people to
no,
jobs they
no,
don't
the way it
deserve.
works is a judge's date of retirement is known on the date of his appointment. I know 30 years or 10 years before that you're going to retire on so-and-so day. I can pre-notify your successor 1 month before retirement.
And
It
yet
doesn't happen for the simple reason that knowing that you're going to retire, I then decide that I may appoint somebody who is close to me. Now on that there is controversy, there is debate, there is difference, there are files going back and forth. By the time you end up appointing either a desirable or an undesirable character, That process of controversy and exchange has taken 3 to 4 months minimum, if not 8 months.
The
So that vacancy lies vacant.
Now, the appointment happens both by the collegium of judges suggesting names and the law minister then having them vetted by intelligence agencies and agreeing to the appointment. Who is the slow element in this? Is it the collegium? Is it the law ministry? Or where does the file get stuck?
Well, the process is supposed to initiate from the collegium. They are the decision makers, and the government under the existing system is supposed to be nothing more than a post office.
So who acts as the obstacle?
So since they have a larger role in the present decision making process, they also have to take greater
But
responsibility.
I think fair answer is both. I'll give you a recent example without taking names that really illustrates the point. A set of judges in a particular high court recommended, because the process to start at state level, recommended their own chamber juniors and their own caste fraternity. That name, those set of names came up here, the apex court. The apex court rightly and naturally rejected them. Matter went back, the same collegium at the state level re-recommended the same list.
So
that's as far as the judicial part goes.
So tell me something then, how do we speed up the appointment of judges? Because if Mr. Singhvi is right, that's the real problem, why we end up with a backlog of 21 million cases. How do we speed it up?
How do we speed up appointment?
Of more judges? Will the National Judicial Commission...
Well, that's what. The Judicial Commission, since it's going to be a body that is clearly identifiable, that is a body that, can be held responsible for whatever is going on.
But remember, this is India. Suppose 9 people on that body come to gridlock and nothing happens.
They will be doing so before public gaze. Right now, whatever
they'll
process...
be shamed into action because it's transparent.
Right now, whatever goes
They
on...
should be obligated by law, and this should be a salutary, desirable change, obligated by law to declare a successor 1 month before the retirement of every predecessor or incumbent.
We've spoken
by law.
so far about what should happen. Do you think, in fact, these reforms will happen speedily?
I think people are so sick and tired of the stage it's reached. People know that the solutions are not difficult, that it will happen. And things like appointment of judges, things like taking matters out of the court system, subjecting them to ADR, alternative dispute resolution mechanisms like arbitration, lok adat.
All of that will happen.
Is happening already and will happen in a greater degree.
Manoj, he speaks as a lawyer, you speak as a journalist. Do you think politicians would actually see through these measures, or will this simply be talking points and left to them?
Well, it's more in the hands of the judiciary to follow through this. The Parliament has come up with also reforms in the legal procedures, whether it is civil, and they plan to do some reforms in the criminal aspect.
But you think it will
also.
happen quickly?
Well, it remains to be seen. I can't say whether
Well,
it
that
will
of course
happen.
is the big thing. It remains to be seen. I'm afraid everything remains to be seen in India. That's the sad part. That's it for this week. We'll be back next week. See you then. Goodbye.